Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thoughts for this week. Psalms 50, 14 to 15. Sacrifice thank offerings to God. Fulfill your vows to the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you will honor me. Proverbs 21:21. He who pursues righteousness and loyalty finds life, righteousness and honor. Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness exalted a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Heavenly Father, we enter your gates with thanksgiving and into your courts with praise. We are claiming these and other promises for our nation today, especially Isaiah 60, 9 to 11. Surely the islands look to me. In the lead are the ships of Tarshish, bringing your sons from afar with their silver and gold, to the honor of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel. For he endowed you with splendor. Foreigners will rebuild your wall, and their kings will serve you. Though in anger I struck you, in favor I will show you compassion. Your gates will always stand open. They will never be shut, day or night, so that men may bring you the wealth of the nations, their kings led in triumphal procession. Now, Father, grant to our Governor General, Dame Marguerite Pendling, strength and wisdom to carry out her daily duties. We pray for Honorable Mr. Speaker, his deputy and support staff, that they may effectively guide the affairs of this honorable House among our honorable members. We pray for their families. We pray for our Prime Minister, Dr. Hubert Minnis, and his family. We pray for our Deputy Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, all members of the governing party, and their families. We pray for wisdom and strength for our honorable leaders, that they will lead with a clear conscience toward God and man. We pray for the leader of the opposition and the members of the opposition and their families. We pray that our opposition members shall keep our governing members accountable for their actions, keeping the spotlight on serious matters and have them resolved quickly. We pray for the decision makers, the planners, and the thousands of civil servants who contribute to the day-to-day operation of our great nation. Keep them mindful of the importance of and expectation that they be men and women of integrity. Help them to be upright, honest, and sincere in all they do. Keep them mindful of their influence, particularly among our Bahamian young people, so that future generations will be equipped to become effective, godly future leaders. Finally, this morning, dear God, pour out your blessings on our nation's leaders. Give them the strength, wisdom, vision, love, and compassion that they require to be effective and godly leaders. Grant to each of them a personal revelation of Jesus Christ. God bless and protect our nation leaders. In Jesus' name, amen. Honorable members, together we pray. Our Father, in heaven, be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a productive day.
morning, honorable members. I received a communication from the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador that he wishes to raise a matter of privilege. And at this time, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you recall that at the last sitting, I drew attention to the headlines of the newspaper. And unfortunately, I did not have that paper at the time. That would have formed the basis of my point of privilege. And in your discretion, you indicated that I should first have that paper and provide you with the statement in respect to the point of privilege.
Yes.
I provided you with that statement, which I intend to read, and I just brought to your attention the headline in the newspaper that informed the concern that I have about the accusation made about the former government, of which I was a part, that the PLP diverted $40 million to buy last election. Which is
Honorable member, can you give the name of the paper and state the date?
This is the Tribune, dated October 11, 2017.
Yes.
Headline, PLP diverted $40 million to buy last election. That in itself, Mr. Speaker, suggests it's a criminal offense that's being alleged against the former government, of which I was a part. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, I want to raise this as a matter of privilege. As I said, 2 weeks ago, the House of Assembly was told by the honorable member for East Grand Bahama that he, as Minister of Finance, was unable to find $42 million that had been allocated for hurricane relief by the Bahamas government. He said that he was not saying it was missing, but that it could not be accounted for. This side, through its shadow minister for finance, the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island, pointed out the folly of that position and indicated our fundamental objection to the implication on honorable members on this side that we had been involved in malfeasance in office. In response to that statement, the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island, in response to that statement by the member from Exuma, the member for East Grand Bahama issued a statement which said, amongst other things, inter alia, the following. And even now...
Honorable member, is that statement you're referring to now a part of the newspaper?
Yes, this is what informs it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And even now, more bills continue to trickle in. The PLP government, we suspect, obtained a resolution to borrow $150 million on hurricane relief, but instead diverted $40 million plus of that sum for unauthorized expenditure on any number of things in an ultimately vain effort to buy an election win. And while that money most likely went to their cronies and other wasteful spending, it is the Bahamian people who are now stuck with the bill. Mr. Speaker, this statement, apart from being untrue, is out of order for a parliamentarian to make an allegation which is a clear attack on the integrity of myself and the member for Engliston, at least since we served in the past government at cabinet level, if not the entire PLP side. I speak for myself when I claim injury in this matter and ask that this matter be investigated by the Committee on Privileges. Let me say that this member of Parliament was not a party to any untoward scheme or any scheme at all to divert or appropriate sums of money that were allocated for and towards the expenses of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. For the record, we remind the public and the minister that when funds come into the government, they all go into the consolidated fund and expended for lawful purposes. Expenditures therefrom are governed by law and established protocols that remain in place. The record will, I'm sure, will confirm that unassailable fact. I trust that this complaint is laid over to the Committee on Privilege. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Yes. Order that the newspaper report, the Tribune, dated 11th of October, do lie on the table. Honorable members, having reviewed the statement of the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rum Kingston, Salvador, together with the newspaper clipping, the chair will examine the claims made with respect to whether or not a prima facie case has been made out, and make a decision and have the matter, if a case has been made out, referred to the Committee on Privilege. But the chair will examine particularly the law as it relates to the Parliamentary Elections Act with respect to offenses with respect to general elections or the holding of any election, and once that determination has been made, the chair will revert to this Parliament with its ruling with respect to whether or not the matter would be referred to the Committee on Privilege. Yes, Honorable. Yes. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Cat Island.
That's a matter of
Kingston, Salvador.
housekeeping, Mr. Speaker. Last week, notices were given of laying on the table several bills. I now see that it appears on the agenda as first reading of bills, and they have not been laid yet. So you have to lay them first.
Honorable Member,
There might be an error.
yes. The first notice of the laying is an indication that bills would be read for the first time, then they will be laid, and given members would then be given the opportunity.
I understand.
Sure, yes.
This is
Introduction and swearing in of members, of new members, lying of documents by ministers, laying of documents by ministers, any? Statements and communications. The chair recognizes the honorable member for.
On behalf of the Minister responsible, it is my pleasure to lay on the table the Public Holidays National Heroes Day Opening of Shops Notice 2017.
Order that the notice be brought up.
Anyone else got notices? What's his turn, Chris? You got it? You got it? Yeah, I got it. One. Yeah, you got it? Okay. You lay it? Okay.
Order that the document do lie on the table. For the tabling of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce, actually. No, we just. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Gaming House Operators Amendment Regulation 2017.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. For the laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communication by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Message from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Civil Aviation Act.
Is- Can I have a copy? Okay. Pardon? Order that the documents be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Civil Aviation Act. Order that the bill.
A bill for an act to amend the Civil Aviation Act.
Yeah. For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamacraw.
Introduction of the following bills. 1. A bill for an act for the designation of specified commercial enterprise and specified commercial economic zones in the Bahamas.
Order that the document be brought up.
Yes. Okay.
Is there a seconder? Yes. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act for the designation of specified commercial enterprises and specified commercial economic zones in the Bahamas. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act for the designation of specified commercial enterprises and specified commercial economic zones in the Bahamas.
For the first reading of bills.
And beg leave to move for the first reading and introduction of the following bill. A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for the registration of non-profit organizations.
Order that the document be brought up. Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for the registration of non-profit organizations. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Companies Act to provide for the registration of non-profit organizations.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
Mr. Speaker, I rise and beg leave to move for the first reading and introduction of the following bill. A bill for an act to provide for the office of the Ombudsman.
Is there a seconder? Order that the document be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the office of Ombudsman. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the office of Ombudsman.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
I do apologize, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to move for the first reading and introduction of the following bill. A bill for an act to repeal the Grand Bahama Port Area Investment Incentives Act and to provide for exemptions from certain taxes and rates.
Is there a seconder?
Mr. Speaker, I second.
Order that the document be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to repeal the Grand Bahama Port Area Investment Incentives Act and to provide for exemptions from certain taxes and rates. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to repeal the Grand Bahama Port Area Investment Incentives Act and to provide for exemptions from certain taxes and rates.
For the first reading of bills, chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise and beg leave to move for the first reading and introduction of the following bill. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body to be known as the Integrity Commission to promote and enhance ethical conduct for parliamentarians, public officials, and other persons to provide measures for the prevention, detection, and investigation of acts of corruption, to repeal the Public Disclosure Act, and to provide for matters connected therewith.
Is there a seconder?
Speaker, I second.
Order that the document be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for first time. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body to be known as the Integrity Commission to promote and enhance ethical conduct for parliamentarians, senators, public officials, and other persons, to provide measures for the prevention, detection, and investigation of acts of corruption, to repeal the Public Disclosure Act, and to provide for matters connected therewith. Order that the bill be read for first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body to be known as the Integrity Commission to promote and enhance ethical conduct for parliamentarians, senators, public officials, and other persons, to provide measures for the prevention, detection, and investigation of acts of corruption, to repeal the Public Disclosure Act, and to provide for matters connected therewith.
For the first reading of bills. Thank you. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamacraw.
I do apologize for my exuberance this morning.
Honorable member, once you take your feet, you can remain standing.
Mr. Speaker, but before we go into the second reading, if I may, with your leave, just make a comment on two of the bills that we introduced this morning.
Certainly,
Thank you.
honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to draw the members of the public, especially civil society, to the attention of two bills in particular, the Ombudsman Bill and the Bill for an Act for the establishment of a body to be known as the Integrity Commission Bill. And I hear the rumblings in the community, Mr. Speaker, that my government, led by my Prime Minister, does not have a plan. And in recent past, Mr. Speaker, I've had the good fortune on the Bahamian, the tab of the Bahamian people to travel to some conferences. And at this point, we're having a gathering of law ministers from the Commonwealth. And the theme throughout those presentations, and even now if you just do some simple research, is anti-corruption, integrity in government. And when you don't concentrate on anti-corruption or integrity in government, it causes precious resource not to go to the entities where they're designed to go, and it causes hurt and pain. And so what I'm suggesting is that once the bills are laid, and I think these things are so simple, we take it for granted, members of the public can come to the House and get a copy of the bill. And then you can go to the website and get a copy of the bill. The commission, the Constitutional Commission recommended, the first one that our government had an opportunity to do, recommended an ombudsman. The second one recommended an ombudsman to deal with issues of administrative malfunction, to assist the poor and the indigent. And also the Integrity Commission. I know that my Prime Minister indicated that we will be introducing a bill that would look at code of conduct for parliamentarians and senior public officials. And I want to say the plan of this government is to restore the integrity of the name of the Bahamas so that foreign investors and local investors would feel comfortable to do business. Any first world country wanting to be on the cutting edge of finance or economic activity, they've brought these legislation into play. So I just want to draw to the attention of civil society. I see Mr. Matt Albury sitting. Get a copy. We're going to start town meetings to have this discussion. And persons now on the radio stations, wherever they are, can look at the code of conduct and judge whether or not they are in keeping with international standards of what is expected of parliamentarians and public officials when they deal with the people's affairs. Thank you very much. Second reading the bill, right?
Thank you, Honorable Member. You may proceed with the second reading and committal.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, as I'm standing, I beg leave to read and introduce for the second reading a bill for an act to amend the Constitution to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and for matters connected thereto. Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, it is my distinguished pleasure to stand on behalf of my government to lead off the debate on this act to amend the Constitution to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and for matters connected thereto. Before I go into it, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to recognize the good constituency of Yamacraw, or the great constituency of Yamacraw. Who saw in the Eastern District, that's correct, in the Eastern District of New Providence, who saw the prudence, and I proved that I proved their trust and confidence in me well to allow me to come to this honorable place to serve them with integrity. Mr. Speaker, I just want to set the context for this constitutional bill that we have introduced to the House. On last night, with your leave, Mr. Speaker, after a torrid moving on about and researching, I was doing my research, my last bit of research to introduce this bill, and I was really tired. I had a conversation with my angel, my God. I'm going to say to my wife, don't get jealous. My mother. I said, Mommy, I'm really tired, but I'm here trying to prepare for tomorrow. Yes, my earthly God. And she said, son, you've already done it. Take your rest. And then get up tomorrow and give it your best shot, all the way from Cat Island. I want to thank my government for its proactivity, its ingenuity to do something that is simple and that is basic to the administration of justice for any country. This experience, Mr. Speaker, or this action that we're now going through, is one that is being taken by many countries throughout the world. And when I say I want to lay the foundation, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you that the first Constitutional Commission, which was led by my government, by our government, suggested that there should be an amendment to the Constitution to provide for an independent Director of Public Prosecution. The second Constitutional Commission that gave its report rather recently, Mr. Speaker, also made a recommendation that there should be, and is in their recommendation 54, they agreed that there, after wide public consultation, including members of the judiciary and members of the bar, that we should amend to allow criminal matters to be conducted by the office, an office should be created, to be known as an independent Director of Public Prosecutions. I can confirm, Mr. Speaker, that the Bahamas Bar Association, in one of our retreats, looked at this issue. And they had a theme called the Conventional Legal Practice in the 21st Century. And the topic then was the whole issue of an independent director of public prosecutions. And what I like about that was when I first laid this paper, was that two of our most revered and respected legal luminaries discussed this matter. And they made very little, or with very little hesitation, confirmed the fact that we in the Bahamas needed independent director of public prosecutions. They are in the persons of Senior Justice, Mr. Justice Stephen Isaacs, who made the presentation. And there was an inspiring discourse between Senior Justice Mr. Stephen Isaacs and Mr. Alfred Sayers, QC, who I want to congratulate and thank him. He was very kind to me in my 10 years bar president, but he was responsible for organizing the discussion. And they discussed the whole issue of the importance of an independent director of public prosecutions. And during that time, they went into the history and they made certain observations about what were the downfalls of not having an independent director of public prosecutions, Mr. Speaker. And they highlighted something that happened early on, and I'm just going to touch on certain issues. I'm going to do, as my father's always instructed me, to do things with style and class. But he said, there's sometimes, my son, you may have to throw the slop bucket in the road, but that's not going to happen today. But there was a time when a certain incident occurred in this country and someone left and they returned. And a nolle prosequi was issued. And these are just certain aspects, because I'm going to go through the act with your leave, Mr. Speaker. And in more recent time, we remember the issue with the prosecutor in Inagua. We remember when Mr. Sayers accounted a situation when he sat in the cabinet and one of his colleagues sat in the cabinet. And there was very serious allegations made against one of his colleagues. And he said how uncomfortable it made him feel being in that situation where he's sitting in cabinet with one of his cabinet colleagues and a matter which could have resulted in serious criminal charges, which could have resulted to a maximum sentence of life, he had to consider. He said that, and I commend him. He thought Mr. Sayers thinks some light years away. So even though he had the circumstance where he was properly responsible for criminal prosecutions, he says he allowed his officers to deal with the matter and come to a proper conclusion. There was a recent matter where a matter was being conducted before the courts, and there were certain representations made. And despite those representations being made by very senior members of my department, alternate decisions were taken. And so, coupled with what the two legal luminaries, as I've said earlier, in the person of Senior Justice Mr. Stephen Isaacs and Mr. Alfred Sayers, QC, and the view taken by the Bahamas Bar Association, I was fortified when my Prime Minister, after writing or constituting the document for the FNM and from the speech from the throne, that we had made the right decision to establish, by way of introduction of this bill, for an independent director of public prosecutions. Mr. Speaker, in doing this, we've canvassed other territories to look at what contemporary experiences are in terms of how they would have constituted the office of an independent director of public prosecution. And so we borrowed from, just for example, two territories. We looked at Canada, we looked at Barbados, and a number of other territories in order to inform our experience or our activity in bringing this bill here today. With your leave, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to read into the record, and I can produce the document for you, a case and just a snippet about the role of prosecutors and what they do and how it is germane to the administration of justice, fair play, and integrity when one considers the prosecution of criminal matters. With your leave, Mr. Speaker. It says, the Bahamian courts, or the Canadian courts, expect a great deal from prosecutors who are subject to ethical, procedural, and constitutional obligations. Traditionally, their role has been regarded as that of a representative of justice, rather than that of a participant advocate. Their functions are imbued with public trust. Prosecutors are expected to discharge their duties with fairness, objectivity, and integrity. Their role is not to win convictions at any cost, but to put before the court all available, relevant, and admissible evidence necessary to enable the court to determine the guilt or innocence of an accused. As stated by the Supreme Court of Canada in Boucher and the Queen, and I quote, "It cannot be overemphasized that the purpose of the criminal prosecution is not to obtain a conviction. It is to lay before a jury what the Crown considers to be credible evidence relevant to what is alleged to be a crime. Counsel have a duty to see that all available legal proof of the facts is presented. It should be done firmly and pressed to its legitimate strength, but it must also be done fairly. The role of prosecutor excludes any notion of winning or losing. His functions is a matter of public duty than which in civil life there can be none charged with a greater personal responsibility. It is to be efficiently performed with an ingrained sense of dignity, the seriousness and justice of the judicial proceedings." And I say that, Mr. Speaker, to underscore the need to give the Director of Public Prosecutions independence, autonomy, and the tools necessary to perform his job fairly. And so I want to congratulate our government for the introduction of this bill in these circumstances. It would be remiss of me, Mr. Speaker, while dealing with the whole concept of the independent prosecution department that we are going to establish, not to just lay a tidbit on crime and its nexus to an independent director of public prosecutor. The independent prosecutor, as will be established, he comes into it when it's almost too late. He's to be fair so that persons who are innocent will walk free and those who are guilty will suffer the consequences. And I want to say that our independent prosecutor will be loved by those who love justice, and he will be feared by those who want to wreak havoc on our society. But I want to say to the members of the Bahamian public that there are certain reports, and when I was bar president, I was the president of the Bahamas Human Rights Network, I always referred to them. 1992 report on crime, the Gomez report, and there are some other reports that look critically at our society and where we all have fallen down in rearing our children. And in the defense of the former commissioner, I would always say when they called and they criticized him, I said, this man's children, they're working. They're on the police force. He knows where his children are. He's done the work and laid the necessary foundation. And what I'm calling on the Bahamian public to do is, because when you look at the police and you look at the court and you look at the independent director of public prosecutions, I'm going to borrow the words from the courts, that they prefer not to see your children. They are now going to the schools and talking to them, doing the jobs that we should do in our homes. The commissioner of police would always say, I would prefer to see them in the band or in structured events. the last thing on his mind was to go about and have to arrest them. I want to address, before I go on, the level of hypocrisy in our country. I say, and I said it before, I tell you where I live, on Cowpen Road. And I want everybody on Cowpen Road to know, just like I talk about the shanty towns, when the police, listen, if you commit crime elsewhere, it's going to talk. We have now, I would advise some of you to use that special number. We have an obligation to rear our children. The best thing you can give to them is introduce them to God. Amen. And like Booker T. Washington says, the next best thing is a good education. But education is not just reading from a book. And we in this House, through the introduction of the bill that I last spoke about, are seeking to introduce codes of conduct in this House so that we can take it to a certain level. We must take care of our children. We must provide them with the necessary things that they need to evolve. We must not abandon our children. So if you father them, take care of them. And those things, these things of which I speak, Mr. Speaker, falls outside of the precincts of an independent commissioner, an independent public prosecutor, or your courts. We need to go back to something that makes sense. We need to understand that we've come a long way, but we've dropped the baton in a lot of respects. And this hypocritical view where we seek to blame everybody, then bring in the foreigner to resolve the issue, makes no sense. These are our children. These are our daughters. These are our sons. 15-year-old and you're shot. Somebody must know something. And we cannot continue in this vein. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I go back to the necessity for an independent public prosecutor now that I see my Prime Minister here. You notice I didn't say my government. I said our government.
You learn it, man. You learn
Yes.
it.
So I want to thank him for his leadership. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we are seeking to amend the Article 78 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I brought, and I'm quite certain that Mr. Speaker is aware of them, but for my edification and for my contribution, I brought a portion of the Director of Prosecution's bill from Canada, and also the Constitution of Barbados, which speaks to an independent public prosecutor. And I would just like, because I know that sometimes persons believe that when we bring these bills, we just pull them out of the sky. And so and the reason why I'm doing this is so that when persons in the community go to do their research, just go and Google these bills, they pop up and you could read them. And you can see the critique of some of the bills. But it introduces, in Barbados and in Canada, they introduce the concept of the Independent Public Prosecutions Department. And they gave the authority to the independent prosecutor to institute and undertake criminal proceedings, to take over and continue criminal proceedings, to discontinue at any stage criminal proceedings. And there, in Barbados, there's a reporting, or there's some nexus between the Attorney General and the independent prosecutors. As you will see in our act, for issues of national security, there may be some, or international obligations, there may be some directive that the AG retains to give to the Director of Public Prosecution. It's not strange. And what remains in the office of the Director of Public Prosecution is that he can question the validity or the veracity of an instruction through the court. I want to say that we believe, as my Prime Minister said in the opening of the Commonwealth Law Ministers, that we believe in the independence of the judiciary and anti-corruption. And so we're going to do our endeavor best And we're doing our endeavor best by putting standards in place and laying checks and balances so that if not, and I know it wouldn't be this Attorney General, because we wouldn't want that type of clash. But he's not going to put anything to the Director of Public Prosecution that is not in accordance with law. And so there may be another Attorney General that may come years on, and I'm just saying that. But in Barbados, it says, the Attorney General may, in each case of any offense to which this section applies, and this is Article 17A, give general or special directions to the Director of Public Prosecutions as to the exercise of the power conferred upon the Director of Public Prosecutions by Section 79, and the Director of Public Prosecutions shall act in accordance with those directions. And then it goes and it lists much more than us. This section applies to offenses under the laws of Barbados relating to piracy, trading, or otherwise dealing in slaves, foreign enlistment publications, and it goes on treason, sedition, seditious meetings, of official secrecy. And so it says how the relationship, and it prescribes the relationship between the Director of Public Prosecutions in Barbados, just for an example, and that of the independent public prosecutor. I also made reference to Canada. And Canada is much more expansive, which you can go there, and it has a section that looks to the directives that the Attorney General may give to the independent Director of Public Prosecutions. It requires that it be in writing and gazetted. And so, and in Canada, it actually allows the Attorney General in certain instances to take over matters, to consult with the Director of Public Prosecutions. It makes one exception in electoral matters. That's exclusively within the remit of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So I brought these two acts from countries that I believe, and I truly believe, are above board, that have constitutions based on our common law traditions, just to introduce them. But before going into our act, I would like to reaffirm what was said in the speech from the throne. Wow. With what was said from the speech from the throne. And I would like to commend Dame Marguerite Penlin, Her Excellency, I do apologize, the Governor General of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Dame Marguerite Penlin, for her excellent articulation of our government's plan. And anytime somebody says they want to know what our plan is, go get this. We've laid the bills. We are creating an environment where people feel free to come and invest. We're doing away with the environment where everybody thinks that they can get a piece of the action. It's based on meritocracy. You don't just bring something in and you decide, because you're coming in and you're the minister, 10% of that is mine. And so it says, the rule of law is critical to the maintenance of the people's trust in the exercise of public authority. Therefore, my government will enact legislation to establish the office of an independent Director of Public Prosecutions. In support of this endeavor, certain functions now performed by the Attorney General, such as the power to issue fiats authorizing the commencement of legal actions in sensitive matters or a nulli prosequi, will be transferred to the Director of Public Prosecutions, end of quote. I will now take you through the act. This is a somewhat simple act, and I want to say to members of the public, come to the House, get a copy. It should be available on the government website. If it's not, we're going to check and have it placed there. And then go to your churches. You can call Matt. Matt likes to sit on town meetings, or if he can't sit, he'll find a couple other people to sit on it for him. But what we're doing, and why I say that, and I do not say it in jest, is because my Prime Minister has indicated that there has to be wide consultation, not just in word with members of the public, but that members of MPs must go into their communities and have town meetings on these very same issues that affect the lives of people. And I don't think he mind me quoting him when he says this: if you're afraid to go to the people to have meetings, It ain't gonna be no problem with us. Who's going to be suggested for nomination? So you could deal with that quickly. And so just let me take you to the act. Section 1, short title, interpretation. Section 3 deals with repeal and replacement of Article 78 of the Constitution. The functions of the Attorney General is still kept. And it says the Attorney General shall be the principal legal advisor to the government of the Bahamas. And that's a loaded statement. I'll tell you why. Because all legal matters, or matters that affect governance, you have ministers that are responsible for them. And so legal issues, whether it be criminal or civil, you will be primarily responsible for that. Criminal matters, there will be a reporting requirement where the independent director of prosecution would make certain discussions with the AG, and he's able to report to the Prime Minister. You know? And also a part of this, when looking at Canada, the independent prosecutor in Canada will be responsible for making an annual report. And when I first rose on my first standing in this House, I did speak in my inaugural speech about the Attorney General setting the pace in terms of providing reports to our Prime Minister, to the persons that we are all accountable to, and that is the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And it says that the Attorney General shall be responsible for the administration, legal affairs of the Bahamas, and legal proceedings for and against the state, and shall be taken. So it says it gives him responsibility in the cases of civil matters, specifically within the remit of the Attorney General. Civil matters and criminal matters within the remit of the Attorney General. Article 3, and it was by no means or by chance that I bring the legislation just to give you a taste of what the international community is doing. It speaks to the Attorney General and his involvement and his ability to give instructions, whether it be general or specific, and you could find that in other legislation to the independent director of public prosecution, and what he is obligated to do in those circumstances. And when you look at the other jurisdictions that we look at, it's basically the same thing. But the independent prosecutor still remains what would be given to him. That what it says in the recent commission report. The duties in criminal proceedings will be given to the Director of Public Prosecution. Article 78A, establishment of the office and functions of the Director of Public Prosecution. There shall be, and it's established the office. A person shall not be qualified to hold or act in the office of Director of Public Prosecutions unless he's qualified for appointment of a Justice of the Supreme Court. So not just anybody is going to be selected. And there's a reason why I said the word meritocracy. By merit, you will get this. And the director shall be responsible to institute and undertake criminal proceedings against any person before any court in respect of any offense against the laws of the Bahamas. To take over and continue any such criminal proceedings that may have been instituted and any other person, or says, by any other person or authority, so he can take over matters, right? To discontinue at any stage before judgment is delivered any such criminal proceeding instituted or undertaken by himself or any other person. And so we had a recent situation the other day with a conglomerate where the unions or nobody else had known that a matter had been stopped. There were certain allegations that certain cabinet members were unaware that another prosecutor was entered. This is what we are seeking to avoid, to separate as far as possible the whole idea of, and I take it away from that, the possibility of political patronage when conducting the affairs which affect the liberty of subjects, which is very important, because we know that our Constitution underlines or restate emphatically that no man is to be slave or bondsman to anybody. And when that liberty is taken away, it's supposed to be taken away by the rule of law. And the person that is conducting it, as I read the case from Canada, and I took the excerpt from Canada, which says what the court expects, that a person imbued with integrity would be responsible for doing this matter. But that matter was done. And that is one of the things that my government is intending to do. You know, when persons travel, and I'm going to go in terms of when people say there is not a plan, I keep coming back to say the legislation that you're seeing being brought are designed to create confidence in the international economic environment for the Bahamas, for people to feel free to do it, to do business internationally with us and come in, and also locally. When persons do their risk assessment, if I'm traveling, I Google the place to see what's happening with the court. I remember the Minister of Social Services, we had a brief to chat one day, and she was saying there was a conference somewhere, and she was wondering if she should go. But based on that conversation, she had done her due diligence. Listen, people do due diligence to see what type of government you have in case they have to go to the court. If there are codes of conduct, how these people should conduct themselves. If I'm dealing with a government institution, is there a fearless, impartial ombudsman that's not a barking, toothless dog, but it has the grit and the backing to do something about something? How you settle your matters? And they look at this. People sit and look. They see whether or not a call can be made to somebody to cause a matter to go away. That's a part of the international risk assessment that people do. And so when I travel, I do that. And I pray God that one day I have the funds so that when I'm going to invest internationally, I could do that risk assessment. And so that is how it is done. The powers of the Director of Public Prosecution under paragraph 3, well, it goes on. And then it tells you about the tenure of the Director of Public Prosecution. And when you look at the legislation, it's pulled from the Constitution. So just like how for the removal of a judge or for the removal of the Commissioner of Police, you look at infirmity of mind, misbehavior, we took those wordings and we put them right back. And we look at the age limit for the Director of Public Prosecution. And it says it goes to may not go beyond 68. And you know that the Constitutional Commission recommended for judges, I think, the age of 72. And then Section 4 looks at the transitional provisions. And then you have the objectives at the back. What I'm encouraging members of the public to do is come and get a free copy of the bill. Hear what I have to say, hear the other contributions by my colleagues, and what members opposite would have to say, and judge for yourself. But what I'm saying to you is this is a contemporary piece of legislation that was necessary some decades ago. And I see my honorable friend from Cat Island and San Salvador. My auntie told me we are cousins. And he sat in this honorable place for years.
Obama and Chitty.
For years. And I must say, on a serious note, I revere and respect him as a member of Dana Bar.
Absolutely.
May God continue to bless you, sir. But he sat in this place for years. and I'm certain. But he sat in this place for years, and he has had the opportunity to present a bill how he thought it should be presented. But did he do it?
No.
No. When they threatened a justice with imprisonment, vilified and demonized that lady, as it was said by the Chief Justice, he sat in here, and I could get a copy.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island. Honorable member, you stand on the point of order.
think, well, I always knew, he found out later. But Mr. Speaker, I know that the member from Yamacore is tortured by the fact that he has to present this bill in the manner in which it is. And I know he seeks some levity to alleviate some of the pain that he feels in having to do this. But I wonder whether the member could identify when it was that you say some justice was threatened to be jailed? Huh?
Go into that, and through you, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to say that there was a serious misdiagnosis of my presentation here this morning by the honorable member from Cat Island, Rum Kings in Salvador. There's nothing that's torturing me this morning. Trust me when I say I'm filled with elation. To stand here this morning and introduce a piece of legislation. And I take lead from my senior when we were talking about another bill that we have introduced. If the member from Cat Island has some innovative recommendations that he would like to make to this government that believes in transparency and integrity, we await them. He's a part of the community. Send them over. And if we're of the opinion, he's a part of them. If we are of the opinion that they're necessary and they're contemporary, guess what will happen? Bang, right here. But to answer his question, it was the contribution made by His Lordship, the Honorable Hartman Longley, in the opening of the Supreme Court of 2017, where he quoted from the former Chief Justice of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And when he said those who know better, and he was referring to this honorable house and members in the community, and he looked at judgments being presented and the way that they're done. And then he went to say, if you know better, you should say something about this. And you should not threaten with imprisonment, vilify, or demonize somebody. He says, and you know what he went through? He says there's an opportunity to appeal. And what I can do, Mr. Speaker, is on my next return to this honorable house, I can bring a copy of his speech and lay it for all to see. But I've promised myself, for what I have seen occurred in this country, and what has occurred to me and my family personally, that any time I have the opportunity to address these issues, I shall, because this government, led by my honorable Prime Minister, believes in the rule of law. Believes in the rule of law. And so that is, in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, that is my contribution today. Okay, I have given you the history, the recommendations by the two constitutional commissions, factual examples of the need for this amendment, legal luminaries in the persons of Mr. Senior Justice Mr. Stephen Isaacs, and a mentor, and he's not a friend, he's a man to me, in the person of Mr. Alpha Sayers QC, who fashioned this topic to discuss it, and we lay this bill with the expectation that all members, right-thinking members of the society, have an opportunity to review it, discuss it, and if you have some valuable contribution to make to it, please bring it, because we do intend, by the help of God, God willing, God spares our life, to pass this bill. So with your leave, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay a bill for an act.
It's already laid. It's already laid.
Okay.
I so move.
Okay.
So move.
Okay. I so move, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. May God bless you.
Seconder.
Second.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Tall Pines.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, it's indeed a pleasure to stand here once again on behalf of the people of Tall Pines and the second this great bill. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to second this great bill, and like the honorable minister has indicated, my grandmother too told me one day that the honorable member for Cat Island is my cousin. and my grandmother said that she used to dance with the honorable member for Cat Island's father, rake and scrape in Cat Island. So let me say, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of Tall Pines, we're elated, like the member for Yamakura, to second this most timely and this most important bill on this honorable House floor this morning. Mr. Speaker, I again wish to thank Mr. Speaker, I again wish to thank my wife and family and my wonderful team members from Tall Pines for this opportunity to be here today and to speak on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, I started off by saying that this bill is indeed a very, very, very important bill and a very timely bill in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, this bill simply seeks to amend Article 78 of the Constitution, as the Minister of State for Legal Affairs mentioned, to provide for the creation of the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and to transfer or to confer on that office all previous powers relating to criminal prosecution, which was previously held by the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. However, Mr. Speaker, it's important to really speak to the entirety and the importance of this bill, and to speak to it to some great extent. I always say, Mr. Speaker, that as members of this honorable House, we must stand for the foundation of spiritual values to ensure that lives are not frustrated in this Commonwealth. Lives are not exploited in this Commonwealth. Lives are not deprived in this Commonwealth. And ensure the safeguard of every Bahamian's fundamental rights and freedom. Mr. Speaker, we know as attorneys that the Constitution is the supreme laws of this land. And it really serves as the North Star in the preservation of the lifestyle of Bahamians. It secures our freedom. It protects us as Bahamians. And I believe the people of Tall Pines and the people of this great Commonwealth would like to see a freer, less violent community, a community that builds and propels economic development and growth. I'd like to see a society where governments could be trusted, Mr. Speaker, where there's no political interference in the judiciary and judicial issues. Mr. Speaker, as a law student and as a political science student, and as someone who constantly looks at the Constitution and looks at politics in general in the Bahamas, I always viewed the office of the Attorney General, save the office of the Prime Minister, to be the most important office in government. And I think the framers of our Constitution and the framers of so many constitutions throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the world share this view. Because in the hands, in the office of the Attorney General lies some very, very serious responsibilities. And our Constitution supports that. And I would also suggest, Mr. Speaker, that this is why the Constitution specifically notes that while the Queen is the top authority in our Commonwealth, and the Cabinet has the control of the government to report, the control of government and report to Parliament, it speaks specifically that the Cabinet should consists of the Prime Minister, but then it names the Attorney General and at least 7 other members of Parliament or senators to make up the cabinet. And we know in this Commonwealth that changes to our Constitution, Mr. Speaker, can be made, and only can be made when changes are approved in this honorable House and in the upper house, the Senate, by the majority of votes in favor, and then carried on in some cases, Mr. Speaker, in referendums. Speaker, we know in certain cases there may be 2/3 vote in favor in certain aspects. For example, of the nature of the office of the Governor General. We know in some cases, Mr. Speaker, that there needs to be a vote of 3/4 in favor before moving to a referendum. But we know, Mr. Speaker, in certain instances there is no need for bills to be, or any changes to the Constitution to go to referendum, because certain parts of the Constitution, these parts are not entrenched. And I would put it to this House, Mr. Speaker, and I think it is trite law that this particular section of the Constitution is not an entrenched part of the Constitution, and therefore would not require us to go to referendum to change. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution as it stands today notes that the Attorney General, or someone who he or she designates, can undertake criminal proceedings against anyone for any crime or take over any criminal proceedings at any time before judgment. And the Constitution instructs, Mr. Speaker, further that the Attorney General does not have to, and this is very important, the Attorney General does not have to follow the instructions of anyone in these cases. I talked about the powers of the Attorney General and the significance of that office. But, Mr. Speaker, this bill, to a great extent, specifically as it relates to criminal matters, speaks or seeks to change this position. Mr. Speaker, within the backdrop of what I've said about the office of the Attorney General and the importance of this office as a parliamentarian, I must note that this bill in Section 3, subsection 78A1, speaks to the Director of Public Prosecution as being not a parliamentarian, but a civil servant holding public office, and one who must be qualified, well, at the stands of a justice of the Supreme Court of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, of importance, the removal, as the minister noted, the removal of this Director of Public Prosecution will be similar to that of the removal of the Justice of the Supreme Court. Speaker, similar to Justice of the Supreme Court, for those that might not know, the Constitution demands that a justice can only be removed if he or she can not perform their duties. That is limited to physical, mentally, or for any other reasons, or for misbehavior. Now, while this bill, Mr. Speaker, upholds the constitutional responsibilities of the Attorney General to be the principal legal advisor to the government of the Bahamas, and also stipulates that the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, shall be responsible for the administration of legal affairs of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, it nonetheless states that moving forward, legal proceedings for and against the state, the Bahamas, shall be taken in civil matters only in the name of the Attorney General, and in cases of criminal matters, only in the name of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And so when then, Mr. Speaker, can the Attorney General act against the wishes of the Director of Public Prosecution? Because we talk about the independence of this office. And this is where, Mr. Speaker, the importance of the supremacy of Parliament and the question of whether or not there's true independence in this office begins to create a debate in the minds of so many Bahamians. Because I suspect, Mr. Speaker, the members right in the front of me, they would probably, Mr. Speaker, jump up and question the independence of this office. And for me, really, there is no real reason for debate. Not if one really, Mr. Speaker, understands, if one really looks at the principles of the rule of law and parliamentary supremacy. Now, Mr. Speaker, while this bill speaks to the independent role and powers of the Director of Public Prosecution, noted in Section 378A6, that the Director shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority. Now, this is a subject clause, Mr. Speaker. The bill notes in Section 3, subsection 78(3), because I know my good friend from Pine Ridge has had issues and questions. The Attorney General may, in the case involving consideration of public policy, yes, Cat Allen, you probably should, but you had, as the minister said, you had opportunities. You had many opportunities. Many opportunities. And it's funny, Mr. Speaker, and because I'm going to speak into the question of nullies. I was just driving. I know, Mr. Speaker, I like to think of the members, specifically the member for Cat Island and San Salvador and Rumkey, Angliston, as the king and queen nullies, the king and queen of nullies. The member from Mangrove Key and South Andres, I consider him the prince of nullies, because he wasn't really in the cabinet. And now the Exuma MP, Mr. Speaker, I don't know. He is a nully prince in waiting. It's always sad, and sometimes I think in the days when they were in government, Mr. Speaker, when a poor mother would be sitting and he'll call their father and he'll wonder, what was the first words the baby said? During their administration, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if babies born several years ago were just first word, nully, 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 nully. Because the word became so popular in the Bahamas. But, Mr. Speaker, we're going to move away from that. And this bill seeks to do that. So going back, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, in Section 3, subsection 78(3), says that the Attorney General may, in the cases involving consideration of public policy, national security, and for the international obligations of the Bahamas, give general and specific directions to the Director of Public Prosecution as to the exercise of the powers conferred onto the Director of Public Prosecution by Article 78(a)(3), and the Director of Public Prosecution shall act in accordance with those general or specific directions. Now, Mr. Speaker, any specific direction given under the paragraph 3 must be in writing and signed by the Attorney General. And I think that's very, very important. Because when the members opposite, obviously as Cat Island already started jumping up and spinning around, I want them to look at the seriousness of that. What this means is that, from my point of view at least, is that while the Director of Public Prosecution has the power of directions over criminal matters, the ultimate power to overturn or change that direction, and only in specific circumstances, still lies with the Attorney General. Why? It goes back to the explanation of parliamentary supremacy. This is the people's parliament. We're the people's voices. And so, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, I would think that it is safe to say that these circumstances will rarely exist in criminal cases in the Bahamas. And when they do exist, Mr. Speaker, you, the Bahamian public, will more than likely, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian public would more than likely be welcoming the Attorney General to raise issue and to give his direct input. The point is, Mr. Speaker, this amendment looks at the laws of other Commonwealth countries, which this bill is modeled behind. And it really intends to bring a new level of responsibility and openness to the way we govern our country. Now, Mr. Speaker, this clause is very, very important. And that particular clause was intentional, I would suggest. One may argue, Mr. Speaker, that it creates and it puts a balance, a check and balance. And so therefore I would say that it's a good and it's a needed clause. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of State spoke to some great length, or not great length, but he spoke about Barbados and I am not going to bore the House again or excite the House on my experiences in Barbados. Yeah, we don't want to go there again. Mr. Speaker, the Barbados experience with respect to this law is something that, that we looked at, but going outside the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, there's a similar law exists in the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth jurisdictions, where there's exact or similar protections for this office holder. For example, Mr. Speaker, in the United Kingdom, they have a Crown Prosecution Service, which has the principal responsibility as this Director of Public Prosecution has. The public has the principal responsibility for public prosecution in England and Wales. And two, Mr. Speaker, this section is headed by a Director of Public Prosecution. And that person is a Saunders, by the way, Mr. Speaker. Ms. Allison Saunders. She now serves. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, like in this case that we're discussing today, the Attorney General in England and Wales still superintends the SPS work and is answerable to Parliament for its performance and for its conduct. And although the Attorney General has no influence over the conduct of the prosecution, except like we are proposing, when national security issues are raised, and then some smaller offense and some other offenses, normally relating to the official secret act prosecutions. Speaker, interestingly, and so as not to impede the work of the director, in the United Kingdom, the director is assisted by a CPS chief executive in the running of that organization. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the Attorney General office works in terms of administration, but I think that was intended to put focus on how have the directors focus on what their job is, to deal with criminal matters and not to be so bogged down in administrative matters. And so I would put that to the Attorney General if that is already not in place. Speaker, due to this arrangement, the use of nullies, and I want to say, I want the members opposite to hear this, because of these measures, the use of nullies has almost become non-existent. It's now very rare. It's now very rare. Mr. Speaker, Speaker, is rare, coming from when we look at where we are now, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, in Canada also, there's a Public Prosecution Services of Canada. And again, interestingly again, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Baron J. Saunders serves as the Director of Public Prosecution. Mr. Speaker, again, as the Minister indicated, in this particular instance, the Attorney General not only has to give a written request, but he also has to publish it in the Canadian Gazette. It takes it to the next level. And maybe again, Mr. Speaker, we may have to look at that process one day. Speaker, just yesterday I was in Christie Avenue in the Stapleton area of Torrey Pines, and if there's anything I have to thank the former administration for is for cutting that area into Torrey Pines. We accepted that polling division, happily. Mr. Speaker, a young lady came out while we were out there doing some cleanups, and she said, Mr. Saunders, what is it that the Prime Minister and your government is doing about crime and about corruption in government? And I asked her, Mr. Speaker, I said, please tune in this morning, hear what we are tabling in the House this morning, and you will see how serious this government is about tackling crime, about tackling corruption, about tackling and moving in a direction of a modern Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I reminded her, Mr. Speaker, of the Prime Minister's many speeches during the campaign, when he said over and over and over again that he would introduce this bill, he would cause this bill to be introduced, where even the office of the Prime Minister, even the office of the Prime Minister would not be able to cause any form of interference with criminal matters. And even the office of even the Prime Minister would be subject to rule of law through this independent Director of Public Prosecution. And I want to thank the Prime Minister once more for being the man of the Bahamian people and making this a reality today. Tall Pines, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Kalani, Tall Pines, we are with you. We believe in the direction in which this government is going. And we say to the Bahamian people, we're not only promising these things. We hear the list of bills that is going to be passed or will be laid, Mr. Speaker, the Integrity Commission Bill, the Office of the Ombudsman, the National Intelligence Agency, and all of that speaks, Mr. Speaker, to where we want to see this country go. Mr. Speaker, you know, I talked about where some months ago this talk about Nully became so popular. And it's sad, Mr. Speaker, and as a lawyer, especially of 16 years, when I sat right in those humble chairs in the gallery, Mr. Speaker, and I sat and I watched a senior attorney at law, a senior member of this honorable house, he thought that what he did in interfering with the judiciary, an island administrator serving as a magistrate, he felt what he did, there was nothing wrong with that. And members right in the front of me, Mr. Speaker, where we have a QC leading, a senior member of the cabinet, I can't remember any of them really stepping up, Mr. Speaker, and saying what you did was wrong and was against the principles of law, principles of parliamentary democracy in this country. It's a shame. Mr. Speaker, it went on, because I said it became popular. It went on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it went on. I call it the absent Attorney General. The absent Attorney General, Mr. Speaker. Just by chance, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if that trip is planned, but that's by chance. I mean, it's alleged, Mr. Speaker, that it's alleged, Mr. Speaker, that there might have been some connections. But then again, another nully that no one could explain to the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, then again, a popular hotel in Cable Beach area, I understand, it's alleged. And that's not alleged. Another nully. Nully this, nully that, nully this, nully that.
They're not alleged, that's factual. They were
I'm trying to be nice.
Oh, okay.
Speaker, nully this, nully that. No one's answering. It's time for change. And the people on election day, Mr. Speaker, saying it's our time to nully them, and they did that. I know Tall Pines did that, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm sure the other speakers, I'm sure the other speakers will remind the quote-unquote Nully Queen, because she's the only standing one now. I respectfully call it a Nully Queen. That, you know, it was a disgrace. And so, Mr. Speaker, this bill is not only important for Tall Pines. I think this is important for our entire nation. And as we move forward, and as we modernize our democracy, and we move, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to speak about modernizing, as I spoke on the last occasion, and the leader of government business spoke about modernizing this same honorable house and taking us to the next level. And when we talk about modernizing our criminal departments and agencies, and as we talk about modernizing our financial agencies, this too, Mr. Speaker, has to be seen as one of the most important pieces of legislation or bills we're going to table, because it's the foundation from which we will build. And it's the right place to begin. The right place to begin in the office of the Attorney General. It's the right place to begin, where persons who are supposed to protect our laws and our Constitution sit, Speaker. I am proud this morning to support and to second this bill, Speaker, this very important bill to introduce an independent Director of Public Prosecution. And it's a pleasure on behalf of the people of Tall Pines, it's a pleasure on behalf of the people of this great Commonwealth to say, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you, Government of the Bahamas. We are moving in the right direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Members, the Chair has received notice of an important situation that needs to be brought to the attention, in my estimation, of the House. And so at this time, pursuant to Rule 44, we'll go back on the agenda to item 6, Minister's statement, and the Chair would recognize the Honorable Member for Southern Shores and Minister of Transport and Aviation.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I don't want to diminish Freetown. Freetown has carriage of aviation, transport and local government.
Transport and local government.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I rise because I see the matter floating in social media, and to avoid any misleading information, I thought I should take this opportunity to bring some clarity. Mr. Speaker, information received from Long Island on Saturday morning was that a barge, fully loaded barge, was seen drifting in the northeastern section near to Grays, Long Island. After investigation, it was found that this was a barge that had broken away during Hurricane Irma, or shortly thereafter, loaded with items headed from the United States to Anguilla. The various authorities were called in, locals got involved. The barge was near to the land. It was concluded at that time that the matter was relatively under control. There was communication back and forth. The owner of the barge was subsequently identified, and there was communication. The owner of the barge came to the Bahamas, I think on Sunday, and subsequently went to Long Island on Monday. And up to Monday afternoon, while there was still some concern and apparent distress, all indications were that the matter was still under control. But sometime during the evening, last night, and between this morning, I think the weather conditions worsened. The cargo that was on the barge is now in the water in Long Island, and there is indication that there might be some diesel that was in containers on the barge now in the water. But I want to inform the House and those listening that all the relevant authorities met this morning, and they are now en route to Long Island to join in with the locals who have already started to take some remediation action. And we're satisfied that the matter is being addressed, and we await the reports from the environmentalists and the individuals from the Port Department who have all gone to lend their assistance.
The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
I think the concern that has sparked the furor on social media is the fact that many felt that there was a lack of response by the government in respect to the matter. And even when the locals determined that they could do something to assist, recognizing the imminent danger of oil spill, they were prevented from doing so. That is the information that came to me this morning. I had intended to raise it with you, but I did not. I think you had other matters to deal with this morning, but that is the concern, and is whether government acted responsibly and in a timely fashion to avert what is now the present danger, and in addition, and whether someone intervened to prevent them from. I think that the allegation is that the police did not permit them to take precautionary measures to avoid and to avert the oil spill. Now the police may be acting on for some other reasons, because I gather that the barge may have goods and other equipment, and they may be attempting to protect that. But I think that was the concern. Response of the government, intervention of the government, to that may have averted the challenge that now persists.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate
The
that.
chair recognizes the honourable member.
I
Sutton Shaw.
appreciate that the honourable member too has some information, and I'm satisfied that both our interests is in the environment and the safety of all concerned. I want to satisfy the honourable member in this House that the relevant authorities are in the field, and we will get to the bottom of it. But the priority at this time is to ensure that any remediation that is necessary for the safety of the environment is being adhered to, is being addressed, and we could address those other matters in time. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable members. Continuing with the debate on the floor, as many.
Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador.
Let me say at the outset that the proposed alteration of the Constitution does not change anything. What it does, anything in respect to change anything in respect to institution of criminal proceedings, all of the administrative aspects of the prosecutorial efforts required to prosecute through the Office of the Attorney General. The only thing this does is establish an office. The only thing it does is establish the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Because the Director of Public Prosecution, a Director of Public Prosecution exists today. And it's not unlike the National Intelligence Agency that existed as a department in the Ministry of National Security, that they are now bringing a bill to establish. So this bill is no more, no less than establishing the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, I say that, that's all it does. I say that because even when, Mr. Speaker, you look at what it says, a bill for an act to amend the Constitution to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and for matters connected therewith. So the use of the word independent Director of Public Prosecution is no more than the usual narrative that comes from the government. They still on the campaign trail. Here they are talking about an independent Director of Public Prosecution. And that's why I said the member must have been, I thought it was being tortuous. It was tortuous in presenting this bill. And so he abandoned very quickly the use of the word independence. I hear him use the word independence, I think I counted about 4 times. And he abandoned it, then he started talking about the words contemporary legislation. Contemporary legislation. and then how timely it is. With respect to whether it's timely or not, I will not speak to that because this is the government and it's their legislative agenda. And so I will not quarrel with their legislative agenda. I could stand here as they used to. Why we're debating this bill today? Because there's so many other pressing things we could be talking about or dealing with. But again, I defer to the government's legislative agenda. It is theirs. And so I will not talk about what they could be doing. But then when people understand what's important to them, and whether this is an important item for us to be debating today, I leave it to them. And so, and then he speaks about it being contemporary. Well, this is a regressive piece. If he speaks to this as being regressive, I mean, not regressive, but contemporary, this is far from contemporary. This is far from contemporary. It is not modern. And those persons who are interested in the role of governance, and those of us who understand understand that there is one fundamental truth that clothes a fair and just legal system, and that is prosecutorial independence. And whereas that notion is left to us relying on the integrity of persons who hold office, the view of most NGOs and contemporary society is that it should be enshrined somewhere where it could be not tampered with. And the Constitution is the right place for that to be. But here, what we are doing is, as I said, perhaps just formalizing, as you will be doing the National Insurance Agency when you bring the bill. That National Intelligence, that's what it is, National Intelligence Agency. That's what it is. NIA, yeah, that's what it is. And you all call it making it legal. It's not making it legal. All you're doing is bringing, because DPP, the director, the DPP is now operating. Are they the director of public prosecution is now that's a post that's being carried out by someone. Is he acting illegally? No. He's acting within the department of the Attorney General's office. That's permissible. Just as a director of National Intelligence Agency was acting in the office of the Ministry of National Security, that's legal. That's legal. Right? And so, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the bill is regressive. Right? The bill is regressive. And why do I say it's regressive? I mean, in 2002, Papa had a more progressive bill than this. Right? And Doc brings one. All he's doing is Papa Doc, yeah. Papa and Doc, yeah. Right? All he's bringing is a bill that, just as I said, establishes the office. Now let me say, if you look at the bill as laid, and then I'm going to address the benchmark that was referred to by the presenter. He spoke about the Canadian position, and he spoke about the Bermudan position. Barbados, yeah. I'll speak to those two as well. There are others. He said he looked around the Caribbean. He looked at Jamaica, I would expect. I don't know, but if he did, that's progressive, and that's contemporary. He may have looked at Belize. If he did, he would find that would have been progressive and contemporary. But perhaps they discounted going down the path they went, which in my view, was regressive. Because even when it was proposed in 2002 to establish the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, even then, that was more independent than this proposition today. So, and in effect, you know, it's in our statute laws, even though it never came into force. And I will refer to the various provisions that was rejected in the ballot for in the referendum. But here we have, Mr. Speaker, the bill ceding all the powers of the Attorney General, the functions of the Attorney General, to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. In practice now, the Director of Public Prosecutions carries out these functions. So that's why I say it's only codifying it and making it and putting it in law. That's all it does. But then, Mr. Speaker, when in the bill, the Attorney General is now responsible for legal affairs of the Bahamas and legal proceedings for and against the state. Now, when you look at what is proposed, the Attorney General may, in any case involving considerations of public policy, national security, or the international obligations of the Bahamas. That's the whole gamut. That's anything. Public policy that's a dynamic term of art that has no definition, no universally accepted definition, because it takes into account local considerations and whatever it is believed to be at the time. It's an evolving and continues to evolve as time and time goes. So that covers almost everything. National security. What does that, in effect? That covers everything insofar as the security of our country is concerned. And crime threatens our security. Right? So, or the international obligations of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, what I'm suggesting is that it is still reserved unto the Attorney General to do what he wished and what he could do now. Nothing has changed. You see, nothing has changed. And if I were to, let's benchmark this against some of the two countries he referred to. Let's take Barbados, for example. Barbados has a provision which is not in the proposed alteration, right? Which have entrenched the independence to some degree, and I will refer to that. It speaks to, this is what the Barbados provision is, subject to Section 79A. That's the powers conferred upon the Director of Public Prosecutions by paragraph A and C of subsection 2. That shall be vested in him to the exclusion of any other person or authority. So the powers, that the functions of the Attorney General that were transferred from him by this alteration to the DPP is not preserved exclusively to him by these amendments. As if you look at the Barbadian Constitution, they are so reserved unto him. And even if you look at the present, when you look at the present Constitution, you will find that what I call exclusionary provision to the Attorney General himself. So why aren't these functions, if you say it is independent, or you say you're becoming contemporary, why are these functions not exclusive to the DPP? It's absent from the proposed alterations. So that in itself tells me you're not talking about an independent DPP. It's only fluff and talk, rhetoric. Right? Now, and also, if you go further, in the Barbadian constitution that relates to the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, they do in fact provide directions to be given by the Attorney General. They do. Right? I never said it didn't. I never said it didn't. I have the document in my hand, I can say that. If I have the document in my hand, I'm going to say, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is that there are some circumstances in which the Attorney General could give the DPP in Barbados directions, right? And it relates. It is not. And I refer you to Title 26 of the Penal Code, and there you will find a difference. Right? No, yes, because yes, I'm looking at the Constitution because in the Constitution of Barbados, in the Constitution of Barbados, they list the offenses under which the Attorney General could intervene. He just cannot intervene in matters of public policy, national security, but he can under international obligation. But I'll deal with public policy and national security. He cannot do that. He is constrained by the list of offenses contained in the Constitution. And those offenses fall to be considered as treason and offenses against the state. And if the member wishes to see where that falls in our penal code, just look at Title 26. So the Attorney General just cannot just give directions. It is just that these offenses against the safety of the state and treason, are taken away from the DPP. In all other matters, the functions of the Attorney General are exclusively vesting in him. And as I said, except matters that concern treason and what I call offenses against the safety of the state. And if he wants to understand that, he could look at Title 26. Title 26 of the Penal Code will inform him of what that means. And so, Mr. Speaker, and also, pardon me? Yeah. No, the DPP has everything except, no, the AG could intervene only in matters that deals with treason and treason and specific offenses relating to it, right? And so, Mr. Speaker, no, what we do different here, what we are doing different here, Mr. Speaker, we are permitting the Attorney General to intervene on matters of public policy. We are permitting them to intervene in matters of national security. So I mean, the circumstances might inspire. Yeah. Oh, the Attorney General? No. Mr. Speaker, I'm just saying that, this is what I'm saying. What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that, Mr. Speaker, you know, let me just say this, right? Just to lay your affairs, right? To lay your affairs. All I'm suggesting, this bill, I have no, see, I'm going to vote for it, you know, because nothing is being changed. Nothing is being changed. I'm just pointing out. No, well, they do that anyhow. You do that anyhow. You do that anyhow. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I said, there's nothing. You're establishing something that exists already. Further, Mr. Speaker, he speaks about Canada. Right? Okay. No, sir, I did not say that. I must say that. What I'm saying is, I'm giving you, there's a suggestion that this is contemporary legislation. And I'm just pointing out that it is not, but by a comparison, that is what's happening in contemporary society around the world today. And that's what I'm doing. I dealt with the issue of timely, and now I'm dealing with the issue of whether it's contemporary. I'm saying it's not contemporary because it is regressive. And just to show how it was dealt with in 2002. Yeah, Papa. I don't have it. Let me see. Volume 1 over there. Volume 1. Yeah. Speaker, in what was proposed in 2002, is that in matters of what was called general. No. It's the hard copy. It's not loosely. It's not the loosely. It's volume 1. That's all right. That's all right. The same thing. But it's in the. It is printed in the Constitution in the subsidiary. It's not in that one, but it's in this. Yeah. No, it's printed in it. Yes. Yeah. So what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, in 2002, there was truly an attempt to make the DPP a truly independent body. With the intervention of the Attorney General, only if the DPP considered it desirable or thought in his own determination that the matter in which he was considering required was of such public interest that the Attorney General ought to be consulted on it, and that was the position, and that was put forward back in 2002. What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, if in 2002 it was the determination or judgment of the DPP to refer to the AG before he could intervene, and today we are saying that the AG could intervene on his own determination. That has to be, on any account, a regressive step. Right?
People deny the first action.
So, Mr. Speaker, that is why I say it is not a contemporary piece of legislation. No, Mr. Speaker, I'm just pointing out making these observations having regard to what was said by the mover. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is 2017.
Then they voted against gambling.
This is 2000. This is 2017, Mr. Speaker. As I said, this is 2017. And I do subscribe today to the view that we ought to have and independent Director of Public Prosecutions. In all of its aspects, Mr. Speaker. This bill, the alteration of the Constitution does not do that. This does not do it. All this does is establish the office. It establishes the office. And hopefully we will soon. I will recommend that you go to the bill that Belize has or Jamaica. Yeah, Jamaica, you would have seen the Jamaica position. You would have seen the Belize position. You said you benchmarked it. And all they did was take the provisions that now exist in our Constitution. They transferred all word by word, they substitute the word Attorney General and put Director of Public Prosecutions. If you do that, then you will have a true. That's what we're doing now. What are we doing now? What are we doing now? No. See, ask him. No, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speak to your lawyer. The reason why we're doing this now by this, the reason why we don't need a referendum. We don't need a referendum. We do not need a referendum. We do not.
Honorable members.
Speaker, we do not need a referendum for the amendments that we're discussing now. We're discussing an alteration to the functions of the Attorney General. I'm suggesting that if you're truly talking about an independent Director of Public Prosecutions, all you need to do is, one, delete the words in the Constitution as they now exist, where you see delete Attorney General and substitute Director of Public Prosecutions. And then you have a provision specifically designed to define the office of the Attorney General. And that will, in effect, bring to you what you wish. That's my recommendation if you truly want it. Right? So, Mr. Speaker, again, like I said, I opened by saying that this is just a continuing narrative of attempting to attempt to demonize and scandalize persons. But I am, Mr. Speaker, speaking to what the matter. Same old you all bring, man. Same old. Right? If you, Mr. Speaker, so Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm fundamentally, as I indicated, a fundamental truth is that the decision to prosecute has to be made and ought to be made independently. Even more so today than ever. The DPP, well, in respect to nollies, Mr. Speaker, nothing has changed. The DPP will still be able to issue nollies. No. It's not. Mr. Speaker, that's what I'm saying. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Right? And so, Mr. Speaker, the DPP will now sign the nollies. That's the position. Not that nollies will stop as being proposed. Not that nollie will stop. And in appropriate circumstances, nollie would be the right thing to issue. Right? And so, Mr. Speaker, the other issue here, again, we're talking about what's progressive or contemporary. We speak to the tenure of the Director of Public Prosecution, the DPP. It is proposed that he will be here for 5 years, renewable in 5 years. Again, it's regressive. But if you were to look at what was proposed in 2002, the tenure of the DPP was likened to the judge. To be appointed, it was required for you to be qualified to be appointed a judge. So to be a DPP, you must have the same qualifications as you would have to be appointed a judge. Yes, I said. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that. What's regressive is the tenure, it's the security of tenure, because you're now limiting the DPP to a 5-year term with a renewal to another 5 years, right? And which could inject some political considerations for their continuation. And so, Mr. Speaker, and in 2002, it was recommended that you have that the DPP has the same security of tenure as a judge. Qualifications, same, tenure is the same. And you may want to consider whether you would not want to have the same, let it all ride. Right? The 5-year term is 2. And so I invite you all to consider that. Because, again, it has a tendency of eroding the notion of independence. If 4 years into the job, I like my job, I need my contract to be renewed, what am I going to do in this last 4 years? Let's take that. Let's remove that notion from the minds of anyone who might hold the office, or for someone who might be capricious in the other office, in determining whether they may want to move on or not, and that's real. That's real. That's very real, because one of the things I remember, I even remember the date, June 20th. Check the Tribune. June 20th, the Commissioner of Police was interviewed, and this issue of corruption was raised. And he said, well, I've been hearing a lot of things about corruptions, and I think there are about 11 files that might have been generated as a result, but I had no complainants. Nobody complained. Check the newspaper, June 20th. June 20th, right? June 20th. That's what he said. And then the next thing I know, bushcraft. Can't even hear where he was. Vacation or just gone. I don't know. You could ask me. You could answer. You tell me. You answer me. I was asked whether it's related. I will ask you all whether that's related. I'll ask you. I said facts. I need not qualify myself. I just said the facts. I said facts. No, I didn't say that. I said I put the facts. You could tell me what it is. No one has said yet why he's gone. I make another case. Yeah, I make another case. Right? I make another case. Right? They published that I didn't pay my water bill. I didn't pay my water bill. I didn't pay my water bill in April. It was April. Well, what was April? April this year. I paid. Yeah, this attached to the bill. I owed them $2,000 and I didn't pay my bill. Right? And that the law firm was owing some thousands of dollars. Right? That's what they published. Right? The general manager, Water and Sewage, made a statement that contradicted all that was leaked out there. 2 days later, the police and other people turned up to the office, and he was put on suspension. Is that a coincidence? Are they related? I don't know. Y'all could tell me. That's what I'm saying. When you have capricious persons, huh? Not, no, I not. No, not me. So that's the point I make. That's why security of tenure is important. And so you may want to consider, particularly in this post, whether, we believe that the Commissioner of Police should have security of tenure as well. And the DPP. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is, once you make an appointment, the appointment will take into account, it'll be a judgment call as to whether the person will be able to execute the job that you're calling on. If your judgment in hiring him was poor, then should you resign or fire the person? Right. And as I said, sometimes we like to, we take, there are consequences for all our actions. And so if things are done by you or me, the same people out there, they'll fire us, man. See, we got fired. Man. We got fired. No. And then the people might not like that. There's much concern over how the Commissioner of Police was treated. There's much concern now about how the General Manager of Water and Sewage was treated. You may not hear it, you may not feel it, but these things have a way of festering. And then the day will come of reckoning. Like our day came, boom, they come too. Right, that's what I'm saying. And so we need to ensure that what we do, that we protect our country from capricious and arbitrary personalities and traits. Right? And, I just hope, not that I leave that, I'll talk about that today, talk about that another time, in another place. And so I would ask the government that if they're truly serious about creating and establishing the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions as an independent office, that they consider the model of Jamaica or Belize. And if they feel that and even Canada has a model that you may wish to look at. He spoke to it, which keeps the DPP independent. And if the AG is deciding that he doesn't give directions, he could take over prosecution and say, look, leave this one for me. I'm going to deal with it. So he has a prosecutorial team as well, right? No, I like Canada. No, I like Canada. No, it's not. It's not in my view. It's not in my view. It's not in my view because he has, like you said. No, not in Canada. No. In Canada, the Attorney General could ask the DP. First of all, it's a complete separate act, right? The act is called Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Administrative Transparency and Disclosure of Wrongdoing Act. Right? That's what it is, right? And so it's a complete act all in of itself. And what it requires is that the director, the DPP, is it's independent. The DPP is imbued with certain functions, right? The AG reserves unto himself where matters of general public importance is concerned to take over, it's not the same wording, Yeah, what they say? Take over prosecutions. And if he takes that over, he absolves the DPP. So they have two parallel prosecutorial systems. But it must start at the instance of the DPP. Now, where the Attorney General is taking over such prosecution, that's where transparency comes in. They have to gazette the taking over, unless of course, there's some national security interest that will prohibit the publication of the taking over. And so, Mr. Speaker, I mean, as I said, it's nothing, all this, see, like the NIA bill, subject to some things. It's just formalizing the department, right? Formalizing. And so, Mr. Speaker, well, listen, y'all have the gun, you know. Y'all have the gun. And y'all the rabbits now, man. Y'all the rabbits, you have the gun. Right? Rabbits have the gun.
The one with the gun is not.
So, Mr. Speaker,
The one with the gun is
I said, for this part, we invite the government. We invite the government that in the event they are serious about truly having an independent director of public prosecutions, that they revisit this bill, delete, put in what I call the exclusionary clause that is in our Constitution now that reserves those rights, those functions to the Attorney General, and just reserve those functions to the DPP exclusively, and then we'll have that. But don't say you're having an independent DPP when in fact all you're doing is just codifying and establishing the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Thank you. Yeah, we vote the bill. We will vote for the bill. Because it doesn't. I vote for it's the status quo. The status quo. Status quo.
As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, just before you proceed, we wish to recognize a number of persons that are in the gallery. We welcome to the Honourable House of Assembly today a team from the Christian Council, headed by its president, Bishop Delton Fernando, who is accompanied by Dr. Patrick Paul, Dr. Debbie Bartlett, Bishop Greg Minnis, Reverend Alfred Stewart, and Pastor Mario Moxie. Welcome. Honourable member for Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I stand on behalf of the great people of Elizabeth. Some have suggested that one should have the power of discernment. And as I look in your direction, you look a little grayer, a little older, and a little wiser. Please accept best wishes on your birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, 5 months and a week ago, something significant happened in this great country. At a margin of 35-4, a message was sent by the Bahamian people. And since that time, the member from Kalani and his team have been trying to determine what is the first play on the first down going to be. Do you run the ball? Do you pass the ball? Is it going to be a quarterback sneak? And the question, once answered, would give some insight into the character of the member for Kalani. It would also tell the Bahamian people whether we're dealing with analog or digital, old or new, ineffective or relevant, clear versus smudgy, whether they will look forward to a time of despair or a time of hope, whether this will be a period of governance for the special interests or the governance for the people. And so I believe that the decision to go long, to go to the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, speaks volumes of what is in store for the next 5 years. Mr. Speaker, we need only look at the preamble to the Constitution where it says, and whereas the people of this family of islands recognize that the preservation of their freedom will be guaranteed by a national commitment to self-discipline, industry, loyalty, unity, and abiding respect for Christian values and the rule of law.
Yes, sir.
Martin Luther King said that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice. And when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. These insightful words provide a globally relevant historical context for our deliberations today. There's no denying that we have challenges in this great country. There's no denying that the simple knee-jerk responses have not worked. You see, Mr. Speaker, nation building requires careful, deliberate, sincere love of country and evidence-based action. But the cement, the mortar of that building has to be heavily laced with an ingredient that we call social justice. What is good for the goose has to be good for the gander. So we're here today to discuss the establishment of an office of an independent public prosecutor, which is going to be an important tool to ensure that justice is fair, that it is impartial, and that it is blind. We are here to further entrench the concepts that build a more civil society and to deepen Bahamian democracy. It is another step in the road to a better nation. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that the possibility of politically directed prosecution is a significant concern for the people of this country. Similarly, the abandonment of an ongoing prosecution because of political or commercial interests is also a concern of the Bahamian people. But in order to understand this, we need to go back and look at why we are where we are. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, there are some greater challenges that we have faced in this country. One of which is the challenge of political victimization that this bill will seek to prevent. Political victimization, Mr. Speaker, was perhaps the single greatest failure of the original Progressive Liberal Party government. It is a tool that is still used to this day and still embraced by factions within that side and has continued to be an albatross around the necks of those that call themselves a part of, and this is an oxymoron, the new PLP. You see, since the dawn of an independent Bahamas, Bahamians have been told to shut your mouth, not speak about injustices witnessed, corruption encountered, dishonesty or unethical behavior that's disclosed. I recall in the formative years of my life, shortly after becoming an adolescent, I can remember being told, don't say nothing about that. Because if you speak about it, you may find that you have no job, that you're hungry, that you're unable to make a living, or worse, that your family's going to get hurt, reputations irreparably damaged, or characters assassinated. It was a very dark time in our history, Mr. Speaker, a time that we should have long passed, but which in the last 5 years we seem to have continued to revisit. Unfortunately, as a country, we have not eliminated the climate of political persecution perfected by the PLP that sends the message, toe the line and you'll be well cared for. Step over the line and your history. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians believe there are two flavors of justice in this country, one for the politically connected and one for everybody else. As we consider the problems that threaten to destroy our country, we fail to accept that the most potent tools in the fight against crime, in the alleviation of poverty, in the misdistribution of wealth, in access to good health care, or an excellent education. Solutions to these problems lie in our understanding that building a nation needs the mortar which is built with natural justice. You see, the older days were very dark days. As a historical reality, they led to the emergence of a group of freedom fighters known as the Dissident Eight. They created the movement that has done most, if not all, of the finished work of Bahamian democracy. And now, the member for Kalani has not only the task of doing some more of the finished work, but installing most of the infrastructure and getting it to work. Mr. Speaker, I, like thousands of Bahamians, have had the good fortune to build my own home. I consider myself fortunate. Indeed, I am blessed to have experienced personally the Bahamian dream. It is an honor and a privilege to serve in a capacity that protects the interests, needs, and concerns of other Bahamians who themselves struggle in pursuit of happiness, support of their families, and ownership of a part of their natural birthright. The building of a home, like the building of a nation, takes place in stages. The care and concern, the attention to detail, the integrity and honesty of the builder determines the overall quality of the home. The rough work happens very quickly, and it doesn't take long to get from the foundation to the roof. The home, like a fledgling nation, can be designed, framed, and put together pretty quickly. But it seems to take forever to get the finished work done and to get it right. That is because the really skilled laborers, the masons, the finished carpenters, they exercise their skills like artists, and they produce a product of which we can all be proud. They smooth out the blemishes. They correct the mistakes. They solve the problems. They create a finished home. And so it is, Mr. Speaker. So it has been in this sovereign Bahamas. As we look forward to creating realistic solutions to all of the problems in this country, we must acknowledge from whence we've come. And so it is true that majority rule was introduced by a coalition of Bahamian patriots from the PLP, from labor, and from an independence force. In 1967, they ushered in an era which accomplished great things for Bahamians. But as monumental as the problems that they solved were the problems that they left unsolved or the problems that they made worse. Deep, serious problems, many of which we suffer from today. Yes, they can be said to be responsible for building this independent nation from its foundation. They did some good. They did much good. But they either created, ignored, or they allowed too much evil. I believe they got distracted, Mr. Speaker. They sent incomplete messages. They lost focus. Instead of telling Bahamians that all honest labor was redemptive in God's eyes, they introduced a system of entitlement and created a nation that became expectant of political patronage. Instead of extolling the values of hard work of any kind, Bahamians were not corrected when they rejected manual labor for the comfort of a white-collar job. Instead of committing or establishing a national commitment to honesty, such as old-fashioned ideals, these were lost to the relativism of hustling to get ahead. Integrity of character was trampled by the politics of personality. Lawfulness was laid waste by lawlessness. Discipline was sacrificed on the altar of opportunism. Tolerance became defined as the approach to people who looked like most Bahamians, who talked like most Bahamians, who believed what most Bahamians believed. Our forefathers and our people, all of us, allowed drug dealing, corruption, nepotism, bribery, and scandalous behavior to become the norm. And so as not to derail the illusion of progress, they ruled with a benevolent iron fist. As long as you shut up, you can be all right. George Orwell, in his famous book, Animal Farm, could very well have been describing the reality of the Bahamas, particularly in the 70s and 80s. This is when we created this view that all Bahamians are created equal. It's just that some are more equal than others. And yet, with the progress that we had in this country, we forgot a very painful truth. And that truth is, and I want to remind people listening and wanting to know why we are here today. Somebody asked me, say, Mr. Speaker, why are you here? What do you do in that room? And I must admit I had to think about it. We are here in order to discuss and make the laws to make this country better. We are here to restore hope to a people that are losing hope. Yeah. We are here to make this country better. There are 4 pillars to this country, and they include this room and that other place, which we call the legislature. A small group of us from this group and that other group are privileged to form the second pillar. That's the executive. The third pillar is the judiciary. The fourth, and perhaps equally important pillar, sits over there. That is the free press. What we have learned in 40-plus years since independence, Mr. Speaker, is that the foundational elements that would have ensured the realization of the dreams of all Bahamians, the infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, of our society was not intact. In their last and thankfully brief and inauspicious term, the PLP government allowed serious assaults on the third pillar and the fourth, and they mercilessly attacked the press. The last time we had the privilege of being in government, we outlined corrective measures and progress to safeguard our judiciary. I am pleased to say that I had the privilege in 2012 to introduce legislation for freedom of information. I believe that the member for Kalani has signaled that we are going to bring that to life in very short order. But today, the F&M government of the Bahamas, now known not just for the heavy lifting and the finish work, but now we're doing some reconstruction and some repair work for the third pillar of this great Bahamian democracy. We are effectively creating the means to depoliticize the process that leads to the safeguarding of this thing that we call justice. We realize that the need for this may be foreign to people on the other side. It is yet another reason why there is credence to the view that they operate under false pretenses and a long since irrelevant name. Mr. Speaker, they are neither progressive nor liberal. Now, Mr. Speaker, we may believe that democracy is alive and well in the Bahamas. One need only listen to the talk shows, read the newspapers, or canvass any gathering of 2 or more people to hear the comments and views of Bahamians from all socioeconomic classes. There's no shortage of criticism. Much of it is directed at the government. A lot of criticism ought to be equal to a strong democracy. But let's look at the history of how criticism, refusal has been treated by the side opposite. There was a previous attempt to tackle the Constitution several times. 2002, I think we had a non-constitutional referendum on gaming. I think that was 2013 or 2012. And then another one very recently. Continuing with my premise that they are neither progressive nor liberal, the gaming referendum demonstrated the contempt of the side opposite for the will of the people. When the leader, the then Right Honorable Prime Minister, looked the people of the country, I believe it was that camera right there, and suggested that he or they would be guided by the will of the people. Well, we know how that turned out, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, the sad truth is that Bahamian democracy is not being threatened by external forces. It is being threatened from within. You see, over the past 2 decades, in sharp contrast to the previous 20 years post-independence, the ability to speak publicly and to criticize the decisions and actions of policymakers, industry, and private individuals has indeed become less risky, in large part because of the work of the original Free National Movement administrations. Victimization, a reality in the fledgling Commonwealth, now happens less frequently, but it still happens. And so we are here today, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that it never happens again. We have seen individuals hauled before the courts because some executive or some executive family member has had someone step on their toe or said something or written something that they did not like. You see, Mr. Speaker, in a democracy, tongues are unshackled or loosened. Bahamians have embraced the right for freedom of speech, and they have had the expected exuberance of a people who've enjoyed generations of economic repression, discrimination, and delayed opportunities. I've just said that the radio airwaves that were previously locked down by the side opposite was opened after 1992 by an administration singularly committed to the deepening of our democracy. That was one step. We are about to take another step for the deepening of democracy. You see, Mr. Speaker, we cannot simply allow it to continue as it is. And this is why the criticism for the member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and El Salvador, raised not necessarily from the feet. Why did they not do this when they were in office? You see, Mr. Speaker, we have to strengthen this democracy, not by repression of people's ability to speak or censorship, but by providing reasonable access to information and defending them when they speak. And hence, it becomes very important that whomever decides who should be prosecuted, when they should be prosecuted, and how they should be prosecuted should be as independent of the political directorate as possible. And so, Mr. Speaker, that is why we are here today. That is why this bill is so important, and that is why this bill should be the first one out the gate. Kalani, the member for Kalani, chose not a lateral pass, but to go long, to go deep, because we need to score a touchdown for the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. You know, an independent public prosecutor allows us to fertilize an environment where untruths, half-truths, or distortions and lies cannot survive. That's why we're here today, Mr. Speaker. For the record, I wholeheartedly support criticism, however caustic, delivered on positions of policy, process, or action. Indeed, I welcome it, whether it is directed at me, and trust me, it's been a lot of it directed at me recently. I agree with Voltaire, a French writer of the Enlightenment, who said, "I may disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to see it." You see, democracy cannot thrive without opposition or protest, but it withers in the face of intolerance and injustice. And that's why we're here today. Mr. Speaker, I want to spend just a few minutes on an area that tells a little bit about who I am, and to speak on the need for us to constantly sacrifice for the public good. You see, for the last 22 years, Mr. Speaker, I have been honored and privileged to serve in the hospitals and operating rooms of the Bahamas. I have worked primarily in the Princess Margaret Hospital, a place that I warmly and fondly refer to as my hospital. But I have spent huge amounts of time in Doctors Hospital and now the Rand Memorial Hospital. Over the years, I've worked as a surgical consultant, caring for patients with heart disease and cancer and kidney failure. But I have also spent lots of my time engaged in the battle that has refined and defined my beliefs on the real Bahamas. You see, shortly after returning home, I engaged the problem of violence and trauma, the shooting, the stabbing, the beating, the raping, and abuse of our people by our people. I engaged as a trauma surgeon, as the head of our National Emergency Medical Services, and as the head of Accident Emergency at PMH. Mr. Speaker, even after 4 years in inner city Baltimore and 8 years in downtown Detroit, two areas that are arguably the most violent places in the United States, I was shocked then, as I am shocked now, at the level of violence and the carnage on the streets of Nassau. For those who might think that I am suggesting that crime has just started, I am not suggesting any such thing. I returned home in 1994 intending to be a heart surgeon, to work on blood vessels or as a chest surgeon. But fate would have it, God would have it, that my role in this country was to fix the blood vessels, the hearts, the livers, the bowels, and the limbs blown apart in the epidemic of gun violence that has gripped this country for almost 4 decades. Mr. Speaker, I have been pleased to work alongside other Bahamian giants, men and women who have sacrificed much of themselves and their family life to stand in the gap for other Bahamians. You see, social justice demands that all persons, poor and rich, perpetrators and victims, immigrant and native, black and white, should have access to emergency care and quality medical and surgical care. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to spend too long with this. Let me say categorically that if it were not for the committed, dedicated doctors, nurses, EMTs, and other professionals who toil every day in this country, who render services for which they can never be repaid, the anguish, the pain, the suffering of our people would be magnified tenfold, and they deserve the appreciation and respect of this nation. And so, Mr. Speaker, I simply say that I shall continue to fight to make my country a better place. As I conclude, hate-mongering and distortion are alive and well in this country and appears disguised as freedom of expression. By whatever means necessary, some push to achieve personal, political, and social agendas, even as they seek to destroy this country, which is so seriously ill. And so it is this reason why we're here today. When the efforts to destroy leads to persecution and prosecution, we have gone too far. So we're here today to introduce a long overdue creation of an independent public prosecutor. We should all pause and reflect on the sad state of affairs. So, to the member of Kalani, I applaud you. Go long. Go long. Because while the other side may love the status quo, I believe that in your effort to go long, that we will see justice flow like a river and righteousness like a mighty stream. Elizabeth supports this resolution.
As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Pinewood.
Mr. Speaker, just allow me to.
We can take a break.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is a good place for us to take our lunch recess. So I do move that the House do suspend until 3 p.m. today.
Seconded. It's been moved and seconded that the business of the House do suspend until 3 p.m. today. All those who are in favor will remain seated. The contrary will rise. The business of the House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.